know, if you live in Northern California in general, or San Francisco in specific, it seems like every day there's another horror story or story of woe about how expensive it is to live here. Well, our next guest knows all about housing in San Francisco. Welcome to Brian Cheu from Mayor Lee's Office on Housing. How are you?
I'm fine. Thank you for having me.
You know, I was joking with you before the cameras went on that you're one of those people in public life that seems to have had every job underneath the dome at San Francisco City Hall. Tell us a little bit about your resume, and it is varied and very rich, especially with regards to the LGBT community.
Well, certainly. Right now, I'm with the Mayor's Office of Housing and Community Development. I've been there for about 9 years. Prior to that, I was the executive director at Chinese for Affirmative Action. It's a civil rights group in Chinatown. Prior to that, I was the executive director of the San Francisco LGBT Community Center. And then before that, I was executive director of Lyric, Lavender Youth Recreation and Information Center, which
is now celebrating its 25th anniversary.
Certainly is. I was just there the other night.
Yeah. So how is it that you've managed to stay still smiling and, you know, not too many creases on the forehead and with all that experience in San Francisco and the LGBT community?
Well, thank you for saying that. You know, I think that for me, it's really the fact that I've loved all of my different jobs, and I think for me the passion really is in trying to give back to the various communities for which I'm affiliated. So whether it's the LGBT community or the Chinese American community, I think I was sort of brought up to try and do what I can to make the situation better for other people. So that's really what has kept me going all these years.
Yeah. What was that book title from, goodness, I think it's not 15 years ago, about San Francisco being a city on the hill? Do you think we are still the city on the hill for the LGBT community? Are people still coming here and saying, wow, this is where I go to discover myself?
You know, I still think so. For me, I was born and raised in San Mateo, so sometimes I take things for granted. But I know a few years ago, my partner had some of his high school friends come over, and he went to high school in Tennessee, sort of a small town in eastern Tennessee. And when they came out during Pride weekend, they were really amazed, and to kind of see their faces with hundreds of thousands of people here, people holding hands, they just really couldn't imagine it. And I think it's when I get in those situations that I really understand what people see in San Francisco.
Yeah, I think it's hard if you're born here or in the Northern California to realize how special it is. I remember, you know, I'm from Richmond, Virginia, and, you know, a few months ago when that judge said that same-sex marriage was, you know, going to be the law of the land of Virginia, I thought, wow, we take that for granted here in San Francisco. It's not that way every place else. You know, and I think one of the things we take for granted is the ability to live and be ourselves in San Francisco and Northern California. But it is getting more and more expensive. And your current work is working with the Mayor's Office of Housing. How big a deal is the housing issue here in San Francisco? And, you know, by extension, what does it mean to the LGBT community?
Well, it's interesting now because our office is in the process of holding a number of different hearings throughout the neighborhoods. We're actually coming up with a new 5-year plan for our strategies as we move forward. And so I've talked to people in different neighborhoods. I've talked to providers all across the city. And no matter what questions I ask them, the answer keeps coming back to me. It's housing. When I say, what are the most pressing needs?
And that's on all sides of the political spectrum.
Whether I'm talking to young people, to seniors, service providers, community centers, people in the Bayview, Viz Valley, Tenderloin, it's all about housing and affordability.
And is there a solution?
Well, you know, I think it's a tough situation. On one hand, we're excited that we're coming out of the recession and we're attracting businesses again. 2 years ago, one of our primary problems was that so many people were going into foreclosure and they were underwater on their houses, and they never imagined that would happen. So now foreclosures have slowed down a little bit. People are not underwater. Unemployment is going down, but now you have the affordability issue coming back up. So it is a little bit of a challenge.
How do you create dialogue in a city that is so, I mean, you know, San Francisco, less than 1 million people, that is so diverse, which is the great wonder of San Francisco, but sometimes can be so polarized. I mean, on one block, you will see people screaming because it's all the fault of the techies and it's the shuttle buses, and the other side, no, it's rent control, and it's because we're not building enough housing. It seems to me like on any one day, every group will have a point that is actually probably really true. How do you bring any sort of I even want to say closure, but even the beginning of a desire to dialogue between these disparate groups?
Well, I guess, when you talk about the city on the hill, I think that what's attractive to me is the fact that we are open to dialogue, that the city is very transparent. When I talk to people, say my friends from New York City, they can't imagine that you could just go up to City Hall, try and talk to your council member, and they could actually listen to you. Here, I think you have that access. But because of that, I think people feel free to disagree. I think one example of what we're trying to do, bringing together people from very diverse backgrounds, for example, I think you might have heard that the mayor is very committed to transforming public housing. And to make that happen, you need to make sure that the people living in public housing and all of the people living around public housing are committed to transforming their entire neighborhood. I think what you have to do is continually create safe forums for people to talk, find areas of commonality. For example, when we've tried to bring people together, even bringing, in my old job, we had to bring together, let's say, traditionally African-American communities, which were now transforming with many more Asian families moving in. Right? So we tried to figure out, how can we get these parents to speak to each other, to sit down to each other? And for us, the secret was food, music, and kids, right? I mean,
that's very Chinese.
Right. But that was something that was common.
Yes,
like people
yes,
could
and
come,
also-
they could
right,
share
right.
food, they could share their music, and the kids got together and were able to spend some time. And you just have to bring people together in those kinds of situations. And I think then you begin to build the trust to have the dialogue. I think some of what you've seen when, for example, when these sort of the techies versus some of the folks that have been feeling like they might be displaced out of the mission, they haven't actually built that trust. So their very first meeting is fraught with tension and high expectations because they haven't done that work first. And so I think that you really do have to have those kinds of mixings before sometimes you can tackle the tougher issues.
Right. Do you think there is a new sense of civility in the city around that? I mean, have we ratcheted down the political fireworks a little bit? Is it making your job a little easier? Or is that too optimistic?
It depends on what kind of topic you're thinking about.
I mean, specifically around housing.
I don't know if it's been ratcheted down too much. I feel like now there are so many people concerned about affordability issues, and because if you lose your housing, virtually every other aspect of your life becomes unstable. It's so high stakes that I do think that it's hard sometimes for people to talk about it. I think people want to try to have that discussion, but it becomes a very personal thing. Almost every person that you speak with, at least if they're a renter here in San Francisco, can't really talk about housing without personalizing it. And that's why I think it becomes challenging.
Right. How does this impact the LGBT community? I mean, there was a time when, I think it's kind of glorified in the movie Milk. Harvey Milk smote the ground and suddenly the Castro became a gay mecca and everyone moved here and it became fabulous. I mean, that's overly romanticized, but there was a time when young gay men and women could move here and afford to be here. Do you think that time has left, or do you think we're just now discovering places like Oakland and the South Bay and the North Bay?
I do think that there's some people I know who want to move to the South Bay or the East Bay. However, I think that there are still trade-offs there too. I don't think that you will necessarily find the same kinds of communities that you will find in San Francisco. So people are torn a little bit. Even some of my friends in the Castro area are trying to figure out how you can keep that an LGBT identified space.
Right.
So I've heard, for example, that there's some ideas about making like rainbow colored crosswalks.
Yeah.
And some of my friends that in the past might have thought that was a little bit camp now feel like that's
Maybe
a
we
great
need to preserve
way.
it.
Yes.
Well, thank you for talking with us. You're optimistic, though.
Yes, I am.
We've been speaking with Brian Cheu about housing in San Francisco, and thanks for watching 10%. I'm your host, David Perry. We hope you'll tune in next week.